Hey, I'm Nick, and in this video, I talk with Adam McLaughlin all about church social media. Adam talks about the one place he thinks churches can start when it comes to social media strategy. He talks about the laser versus the shotgun approach and which one is preferred. And we also spend about 5 minutes on each of the major platforms, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, and how churches can leverage each of them really, really well. Now, this interview is part of bonus content for the New Digital Church course. If you're interested in that, check out newdigitalchurch.com. Go ahead and subscribe to this channel if you want to see the other videos in this series, as well as hit that like button if this is helpful to you. Adam, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Nick.
You bet. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do. And I think we have to add in where you are because it's just an interesting part of your story,
Yes.
that you're on the move. You're a little bit, not stationed in one place now. You're in your house
Right.
and your car kind of. So tell us all about that.
Well, you can see from my background that obviously I'm in an RV, and my wife and I live in a trailer, and not the trailer trash kind of trailer, but you can see it's very nice. And we actually travel full time. We've been on the road full time since August of 2018 with our 3 boys. So the 5 of us live in about 310 square feet. So if you ever feel like your house is small, then give me a call. I'm happy to chat about that. And but one of the things that we love doing, and one of the things that we set out to do, is to visit all kinds of different churches all over Canada and the United States. And so in our first almost 2 years on the road, we visited 31 states, 9 provinces in Canada, and we visited 42 different churches. We were first-time guests at 42 different churches. So we've gotten to see a lot of different things, and we're learning a lot about what is that first-time guest experience like. And so a big part of my business is working with churches and helping churches and helping them get clear on who they are and how they present that message and how they connect with their community.
Yeah, and you do this for businesses as well, right? So you help churches, but you also help businesses.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure there's learnings from both. And gosh, we could probably just do a whole conversation on the learning from 42 first-time church visits or whatever. That's got to become a book or something. You need to put that together.
Well, I was working on a book, and we were aiming for 50 church visits, and then the pandemic happened. And so
yeah.
that
Cut
could
you
have put the
short just a
kibosh
bit.
on the last little bit there, but 42 is still not a bad research pool to pull from.
No, I think that'd be fine. Nobody would say, what happened to the other 8? You know what I mean? Like, I think that'd be good. But we're going to talk about something different. So I have to come back to that one, another video or something like that. We're going to talk about like engagement online. A lot of churches are struggling there. They're doing more, but not necessarily seeing more in return. And
Right.
so I think you could offer, a lot to church leaders trying to figure out how do we help with online engagement and the content we're creating and all of that. And you've seen mistakes here. So let me just ask it that way. What's a big mistake that churches are making as we try to engage online?
Well, I think one of the things we have to recognize is that while your church may be creating way more online content than you have before, so is every other church, so is every other business, so is every other not-for-profit organization, so is everybody else who's looking for attention on social media. And so it's not really a correlation that now we're putting out way more content than we used to, so we should get way more exposure than we used to. Basically, we all just scaled the level of competition together, right? So the churches who were putting out way more content early on got a little bit ahead of the game for the churches who took a few weeks or a few months to get to that point. But we have to really create content that cuts through the noise. And this is one of the challenges I think that churches face, is that we think that creating the content is sufficient. And creating great content is important, but the real challenge is getting people to click and engage with that content. And if you can't get people to click and engage with that content, then it doesn't matter how great the content is if nobody sees it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of churches are new to this, or even if we have been doing it for 5 years, maybe we're just doing it the way we've always done it. And so it's the same, like we're getting the same results. We think we're making it better, but maybe we're not. So how do we create great content? Like, where does that start?
Well, the first thing you have to look at is who is your audience? Who's going to be consuming this content? Who do you want to consume this content? So for many churches, and I would suggest most and probably all churches, this would be the people in your community. So the important thing is to answer questions that the people in your community are actually asking. And one of the ways to find out what questions they're actually asking is to ask them, right? What are you going through? What can we help with? And there's all different ways we can do that online. You can do that in person. You can do that with a survey. You can do that with people in your church. And the reality is people in your church are asking the same kinds of questions as people in your community. So being able to connect with people who already know, like, and trust you, send out an email to people in your church, say, hey, what kind of questions can we answer? If we did a Q&A with Pastor so-and-so, what kind of questions would you want to ask? What would you ask Pastor so-and-so? And real life answer questions that people are asking. I don't think now is the time to be doing, a deep dive into the value of Leviticus and how it applies to 2020. It might be for your church. Don't let me stop you if it is, but I wouldn't default to that as a topic. I would think people are asking questions about how can I strengthen my marriage when we're at home together and that's been a challenge. How can I parent differently during a pandemic? How can I pay my bills when I've been laid off indefinitely? These are real life questions. Like, does God even know what's going on in my life? Does God even care what's going on in my life? If he knows, is he even willing to do anything about it? Right? Like, I think these are real life questions that need to be answered. And so if you are trying to answer the question that you as a pastor want to answer, that could look different. Hey, I've been waiting all my life to do a series on X. And now that I have a little more time on my hands, I'm going to do that series on X. Okay, that's great and that's wonderful. As long as the people in your community right now are asking about X, right? And if you can't figure out what they're asking for, what they're looking for, then your content's not going to get watched, as good as it is and as great as it is. A sermon series that did really, really well last year might not be really, really applicable in 2020 because this is 2020. And I don't know how else to say that, right? And so sure. It's possible that your content is great, but not resonating with your audience. So starting with who is your audience. And I'm not saying you have to water down your biblical principles to connect with your audience, but, instead of your daily devotion about, 13 things God says about tithing, most people aren't thinking to themselves, man, if I just could figure out how I could tithe more often, then that would really help 2020 move along a little bit quicker. They're just not having that conversation. But if you could say 3 biblical principles about sowing and reaping, 3 ways to make your money last longer, 5 fun activities to do in our city with your kids for free, right? And just connect with the community. This doesn't have to negate biblical principles, but you do really have to answer questions people are actually asking if you want to resonate with your audience.
Well, and what you're getting at too is, the church that's doing daily devotionals and it's insider focused. Well, I mean, that might connect with, I wouldn't even say your whole church, because most churches have different groups of people in it, right? You got the people who are core, love Jesus, lead themselves in terms of faith. You got people who are journeying, figuring things out. But then there's that whole other audience, like you're saying, our community that are not a part of any church. And I would imagine your recommendation would be, think about them. When you're doing on social media, don't just cater to the people who are already part of your church and who are probably going to read that anyway. And, think that way. You'd probably say, think about those other people, right? Like when we think about our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also need to get your audience interested enough to actually click and watch your content. So you can't call your Facebook video, Thursday's devotion, and get somebody who's not currently engaged with your church wanting to click to find out what that means. Or you can't just take your Sunday morning message or your Sunday morning sermon or, your experience and service and repost that on Tuesday and expect that people who've never engaged with your church are going to sit there and watch the whole thing. But if you took a clip from your devotion or a clip from your message, or you called your devotion something like, 3 ways to grow closer to my kids today, or 3 things that matter to a teenager, then you're going to be having a different conversation where people actually want to engage with that content. You know, you could take your sermon, you can chop it into 3-minute clips. 3-minute clips do really, really well on social media. And it could be like one thing that will make today better. And it might be a little tiny piece of the whole sermon. And when somebody watches that, you put a link to the whole sermon, and now they get the chance to watch the whole sermon. But they're not going to go through a 40-minute clip or an hour-long clip or your whole service in order to find that 3-minute piece that could matter to them. You kind of have to give that to them in bite-sized pieces.
Yeah, and that makes me think about something you said before we were recording, that churches are taking like a shotgun approach, like just more stuff, and maybe not as intentional about all of that. And
Right.
even to the extent I'm seeing other people now talk about how, you know, you're better off doing one really well planned out intentional piece of content than 5. But I don't know if we think that way. Like a lot of times we think, well, more lines in the water, 5. You know what I mean? Like let's do 5. So like talk about that. What should we do instead of this shotgun approach?
Well, instead of a shotgun approach, I would recommend a laser approach. And it's really easy to say. It's a lot more difficult to actually execute. And the reason is because we have only a small amount of time to grab somebody's attention. So if somebody's browsing through Facebook and, you know, one day you're posting about finances, and one day you're posting about family, and one day you're posting about hope, and one day you're posting about health, and one day you're posting about, you know, mental stability and all these different things, you are like, hey, let's throw all the lines in the water. And let me kind of distill that down to, I think that was a good strategy in the days when you were the only church in town. Those days no longer exist, right? People will drive past 5 churches to get to your church on a Sunday morning. And so I think that approach actually says, or actually doesn't take into consideration, that every church has the opportunity to reach a specific piece of your demographic, a specific part of your city in a certain way. And as all the churches together in your city work together, now we've got all kinds of lines in the water to get people to introduce people to Jesus. And so I would really encourage churches to figure out what is the thing that you want to resonate in your city. What is that thing that you know, Mark McDonald wrote a book called Be Known for Something. I would highly recommend it. And what is that one thing you want to be known for? And how does that live out through all of your communication? So, I mean, let's just pick a topic. Let's say you want to be known for building strong families. You know, maybe that is your church's core value. Well, all of the content that you create can be about family. Now, it could be about finances in light of family, and it could be mental health in light of family, and relationships in light of family. But everything comes through that filter of family. All of the content that you create for your teenagers, all that content is in light of family. You know, now that could be, you know, here's how a teenager plays into their role as part of your family. It could be one day you're going to start a family. Here are the things to be thinking about in relationships. And it could be, you know, here's how you can respect other people's families, you know, all those things as it relates to family. And then all of your kids' content as it relates to family. Here's how we do chores because family matters. Here's how we connect with each other when we're doing game night because family matters. So I'm not saying that your topic or your focus or your core value has to be family. It's definitely not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that if your church's value is family, and the next church down the road, their value is business, and the next church down the road is mental health, and the next church down the road is personal finance, and the next church down the road, you know, as we go, then now we've got all kinds of lines in the water. And ultimately it's how can we get more people to connect with Jesus, not how can we try and get everybody to connect with our church.
Yeah, and you're like that laser approach that you're talking about, by figuring out that one thing, and it makes sense, is going to get a better return, because I don't think that's how we think naturally. Like, no, we can't just be about that. We're about the Bible, and the Bible speaks to all these different things. And you know what I mean?
Right.
We can't just reach families. We got to reach other people too. And that's true, but there's so much power in the focus. And the reality is our churches aren't going to reach everyone individually.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that's true too, that by focusing, it's kind of like we said with the post, right? Like one really good post might outperform five altogether.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because of the focus behind it. I'd love to talk about the specifics, like what that looks like on social media. So maybe we could jump in and talk about Instagram and say, okay, on Instagram, I've had a couple conversations just today with people who've said that that's when they're thinking about churches, their church, and being on social because of who they want to reach. Now, both these conversations revolve around parents. So they're thinking about, people that are 25 to 40 and with younger kids, they're thinking of Instagram. How could this work on Instagram? Like what could that look like?
Well, so on Instagram, you can put a 60-second clip into the timeline video of Instagram. And then you can link out to Instagram stories. You can put IGTV, I should say. You can put a larger or a longer version in IGTV. I think it's up to 10 minutes right now. So what you really need to do is you need to make the first 60 seconds of your video capture people's attention enough that they want to click to the whole story on IGTV. And having somebody stand there and talk into a camera isn't enough to capture attention. So I would always recommend that you add in captions. If you look statistically, and I don't know what it is currently, but it's nasty high. It's north of 90% of videos on Instagram get watched with no audio on, at least initially. Now, somebody gets really interested in something like, let's say, a TED Talk or something like that. They're going to click. They might listen to the rest of the audio, but you have to imagine how often are people consuming video on social media in a place or a time where they don't want audio on. They're on the bus, they're on the can, whatever it might be. They're lying in bed next to their husband or wife who is also watching videos on Instagram with no audio on, not to disturb each other, right? And so you need to capture attention in a practical sense. It's your captions. So have captions that show what the person's saying the whole time in your video. And there's lots of iPhone apps that'll do this. And of course, video editing software will do that trick as well. And then there's some online softwares and, same idea. And also your description. So when we get on news sources for being clickbaity, there's a reason they're clickbaity, and that's because it works.
Yeah.
Right. And
Sure.
I think that the church listen, the 11th commandment that is missing is not thou shalt not use clickbait. Okay. So feel free. But I mean, obviously do it in a moral and ethical way, but you could say things like, hey, 3 things that mean X, 3 things that will make your day better, 3 things that'll make your relationship with your kid better. 3 things that teenagers want from their parents. And you're not giving away the whole message, which is why it's clickbait, because somebody has to click to find out the whole message, but you are enticing them. Another one that works really well is this versus that. So, working from home versus working at a coffee shop, or, one-on-one time with your kids versus family time with your kids, right? And obviously we know both are important, but you need to find that balance. And so maybe that's what that video is about. And so now somebody sees the title and then they start reading through the captions, which obviously is giving them more and more of the message. But that first 60 seconds is when you have to capture their attention, specifically on Instagram. And the first 10 seconds is when you really have to capture their attention, or else they'll keep scrolling. So the first 10 seconds is something that really captures their attention. The first 60 seconds hooks them in to the whole topic. Like maybe let's say it is 3 ways to connect with your teenager. That first 60 seconds is only one of those ways. And at like second 55, you're like, and number 2 is, and then they get the button that says keep watching, right? So it takes a little bit of planning out when you're doing the video, but now when you keep watching, now they go to IGTV, they see your long form content. And the more people that click through and see your long form content, the more Instagram shares that with other people, because obviously they feel like there's an interest level with your audience. So maybe somebody else might be interested as well.
Sure. How about if we shift gears and we say Facebook? What could this look like on Facebook? And again, a lot of these platforms Facebook owns Instagram, but they're sharing some of the same kind of things, you know what I mean? Or what it looks like and different things, but the audiences are different. The engagement is different. All that's different. So how about Facebook?
Yeah.
What would you say there?
Yeah, so Facebook, very similar to Instagram and also different. So you nailed it. I would say that you still want captions. There's still a high amount of content that's watched on mute on Facebook. You do want square content, as tempting it is to put widescreen content. So instead of chopping off the sides of your widescreen, take your widescreen and then put a title above it and a title below it to make square content on Facebook. And the reason is, if you're browsing through Facebook and you see a widescreen video, it takes up like 20% of your screen. If you see a square video, it now takes up like 35% of your screen, which now means that when people are scrolling, they're more likely to see more of the video. And also, with a title on the top and a title on the bottom, they're going to get the idea of what that video is about just by scrolling past it. So that's what I would recommend for Facebook. Now, Facebook, you could put even longer content. You don't have to limit it to 60 seconds like the Instagram timeline. So it's a really good place to put like 4 5-minute videos, little clips of your sermon. Make sure that you link to the full version of your sermon. So if somebody is interested in what they saw, they can click through. But one of the great things about Facebook is that it is way easier to share content with friends on Facebook than it is on Instagram. So Instagram, you would have to download the repost app and then you can repost it. And most people don't do that, even though it works, they just don't. Facebook, right there, built into it, is a share button. And so one of the things that you can do on Facebook is you can say things like, tag a friend who likes this, right? Tag a friend who likes this topic, or who did you learn this from, or who is somebody that you met at our city, right? And so now people start tagging each other and they share that content a lot more. So a great thing that we like to do on Facebook is ask more questions. Your conversation, your title has to be about questions, and that gets people talking, it gets people commenting, and the way that Facebook's algorithm works, that shares it with more people, and when more people share it, like organically, the algorithm shares it, more people are also likely to click that share button. And so it's one of those things on Facebook is asking questions, get those comments. You can even ask for pictures in the comments on Facebook. So let's say you're talking about, parenting, and, in the comments, bonus points if you share your favorite selfie with your kids, right? You can't do that on Instagram, and it doesn't work great on Twitter. So, that's one of the things in Facebook, is to ask for a comment that includes a picture. And when people actually take the time to do that, Facebook goes, wow, these people just didn't click the thumbs up. They didn't just type a comment. They actually took the time to upload a picture. They must be really interested in engaging with that content. And that really helps shareability.
All right, last one. I know there's multiple. I mean, gosh, how many social networks could we do? I'm going to leave Twitter out. You mentioned Twitter. I want to talk YouTube, because I feel like churches have been on Facebook and they've been or getting on Instagram. But YouTube feels like for a lot of churches, they're just now getting there. And, COVID-19 helped spur that on, because they need to put video content in there and all that. So but at the same time, I think the frustration level's high, because unlike even some of these other social platforms, it's not like you show up and people are just there. They have to subscribe. Like, it just feels different, right?
Yeah.
And the churches, even if they weren't doing Facebook or Instagram well, they might have had accounts that had some following. And YouTube, they might be building it from scratch. So What would you tell us about YouTube?
So the big thing to understand about YouTube, it is the second largest search engine in the world after Google. People on YouTube are searching, how do I fix my leaky toilet? How do I replace my headlight? I can't get, I've been on YouTube, I don't know how many times, when there's an issue with my RV, right? So it's like, how do I fix this on an RV? Because you can't just go to the hardware store and ask the average guy there, how do I fix this on my RV? Because they say, I don't know anything about RVs. And so, that's why YouTube is a huge search engine. But YouTube is actually owned by Google, who's the #1 search engine. And so Google wants you to spend time on YouTube. So if you probably noticed that in the last couple years, but really recently, if you search something on Google, a bunch of YouTube videos come up where you can actually play the video right there in the Google search. So you have to position your YouTube content to answer a question every single time. How do I, when do I, why do I, all these types of things. Now, okay, you can push back against me, and Ariana Grande or whatever her name is this week has like 18 million views and her video doesn't ask a question. I get that. But if your church wants to make a difference on YouTube, the way to get into search results is by asking a question. Those how do I, when do I, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if you want to figure out what people are asking, again, back to what is your audience asking, do a Google search about your topic. And as you're typing in the Google search, it's going to try and fill in the rest of your question for you. Those are questions that Google knows people are actually asking. So try and name your YouTube video after one of those questions, fill in the blank questions, right? So if you type in personal finances and then just watch what other results Google pulls up, like how do I talk to my spouse about, or how do I budget, or how do I get this in line? How do I talk to my bank about changing my interest rate, whatever that is, right? Now you make YouTube videos about stuff that people are actually searching. And you can go right on YouTube and do the same thing. You start typing in the search box, it's going to pull up a bunch of suggested search-related ideas. So put in your core values, that one thing that you want to be all about, into that search box and see what kind of topics people are looking for. The other thing is that too many churches post something on YouTube and then just let it sit there. But again, just like every other social network, if YouTube sees people engaging with your video, then they're going to share it with more people. So how can you get more people to that video? You can send out an email to everyone in your church and say, hey, we just uploaded this YouTube video about XYZ. Go check it out. You can post your YouTube video to Facebook. You can post it to Twitter. You can post a 1-minute summary on Instagram and say, hey, link in bio, go see our latest on YouTube. So YouTube is a bit of a hub in that it holds your video content, which is really important right now in social media, is video content. And then you find ways to push people to that video. And that leads to likes, and it leads to subscribes, and it leads to organic reach. Simply just posting the video on YouTube and then getting disappointed in a week when barely anybody saw it, that's a really great way to lose momentum and motivation to be on YouTube. But it is worthwhile to be there. And I would also say that you want to watch what you're competing with. So for instance, if your church is about, let's say, personal finances, you just put a video on YouTube like, how do I create a household budget? Well, you're going to be competing with like the Dave Ramseys of the world, right? And so that might not be the best way to tackle that one. But you might say, where can I get financial help in your city name, right? Because Dave Ramsey isn't trying to go after Nowheresville, Washington. Dave Ramsey is looking for the big topics you can really niche down and talk about specifically in your city. Where are 5 parks your kids can play for free? What are 3 activities to do on a hot summer day? Where are 10 places you can volunteer this Saturday with your family in your city? Those are some really great kinds of topics and some really great directions to go with YouTube.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for adding all of this to our church digital plan and how to use these channels well, and focusing on the audience and then building the content off of that. I think it's all really helpful. You help churches with this, obviously. We talked about that in the beginning. So how can churches connect with you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, well, the best way to connect with me is my blog, adammclaughlin.net. And if anybody owns the .com, please let me know. I'd really like to own it, but it's blank right now. So I got the silver medal of domain names, adammclaughlin.net. And there you could find all my social media channels. You can find all my contact information. You can see my blog where I blog regularly to help churches learn how to impact their community and their culture.
Cool. Thanks, Adam.